like to call the February 9th school committee meeting to order for the purposes of starting our superintendent candidate interviews. Tonight we will be interviewing Tom Milicheski from currently the superintendent resident in Medford, Massachusetts. I'd like to make a big thank you to RCTV and staff that made this in-person meeting possible. Really, everybody. I mean, there's too many people to name, and all of our IT and central office staff. In the packet, you have 3 sections of the interview questions. So there's 2 for tomorrow night and 1 for tonight. In terms of the questioning, I was going to allow for follow-ups to the questions with an eye on the clock, and if that becomes starting to eat away at time, we'll then keep the follow-ups until the end. And I'll explain this to Tom. An hour and a half isn't drop dead. If we need to add another 15 minutes or something, that I wouldn't want to add any more than that, but if we need to add another 15 minutes, that's fine. We'll just make sure that the other candidates have the same option tomorrow night. So I guess having said that, I think we're ready to go. So, unless anybody has any questions.
You have to call to order.
Oh, and well, I called the order. We don't have to do it roll call. Make me nervous there.
That's a rookie.
Well, you're used to it because the only thing you've done is online, right?
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see you.
Good evening, sir.
Welcome, Tom.
Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
So, good evening. I will introduce your first candidate to you for his interview, Mr. Tom Milicheski. I'll get out of your way and let you go.
So, welcome, Tom, and a sincere congratulations for being here, and thank you for being here. The way tonight will go is the committee will ask questions of you. I think you have a copy of it there, and to start, I'll allow for follow-ups to that. If I see that it starts to eat into the time, then we'll just kind of keep follow-ups until the end. The hour and a half is a little flexible. If we need another 15 minutes or so, we'll do that, as long as you're all right with that.
Perfect.
And we would have to allow that for the subsequent candidates. But again, really a sincere thank you for your candidacy, and look forward to this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson.
Yeah. And so with that, if you have an opening remarks you'd like to make.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's really nice to see you, and I have to say it's really nice to see you all face-to-face and to have this opportunity. I know I've had a chance to meet some of you on Zoom screens, but even to be able to see you tonight, I really appreciate this opportunity. So first, would like to thank each member of the school committee tonight. So Ms. Nazaro, Mr. Brandt, Mr. Wise, Mr. Robinson, Ms. Gaffin, and Mr. Parks, thank you for this opportunity to interview you tonight and to learn a little bit more about Reading, and also for you to learn a little bit more about me. And also, I'd just like to say hello to the members who I know who are not here of the community, who can stream or watch the video. Just like to say I thank community members who took time yesterday to get to come to some of the focus groups. I really appreciated having the opportunity to meet with teachers, meet with parents, meet with community members, meet with central office staff, to be able to learn more about what they love about the Reading Public Schools, and also some ways that they think that Reading Public Schools can grow. And I just really value that opportunity. So I'd like to thank all of those who took time to meet with me. So as an opening, I would just like to, after I say thank you, like to say I am here tonight because I am really compelled by what I think are the core strengths of the Reading Public Schools, and also really compelled by some things that I've learned about as opportunities for growth for the Reading Public Schools. And I feel that my leadership background, skills, and approach align with sustaining some of those strengths and also, capitalizing on some of those opportunities for growth. So I'd love to start there. So as I've read about the Reading Public Schools, as I've now chatted with a lot of different stakeholders, I have learned a few core strengths that have stuck out, and I think have become resoundingly clear. I think the first one of those is the greatest strength, which generally people have said loud and clear, after the wonderful students, right, is just the talented, passionate, dedicated staff of educators. And I mean teachers, paraprofessionals, principals, central office staff, nursing staff, custodial staff, everyone, role that I hear about, I hear the same thing, that they are talented, dedicated, passionate, and really care about the Reading Public Schools. And I think that for any district, that's the core of the district, is a really strong educator force. The second thing I've heard a lot about is just the great pride that the community takes in providing children with a well-rounded education. And I think that starts with the reputation for excellence in the arts, and drama, and music, and athletics, and also the district's commitment to social and emotional learning and developing students and people, in addition to students who are prepared to do well academically. And I think that the third thing that I've heard loud and clear is just the great pride that the community has as a whole for the district. I think that the override is like one clear example of that, but even more than that, I have loved hearing from students who just speak with such pride about their school and love for their school. Parents who speak so highly about their children's educational experience in the Reading Public School. Right? Community members with no children in the schools who just speak really highly about the schools. I think that just that support and that pride provides really an incredible foundation, right, and really positions Reading as a really strong district. So I've enjoyed learning about all of those core strengths, and I think that allows Reading to operate from a real position of strength. Right? And I also am someone who believes in those same things, that I believe in having high-quality, talented educators to lead the work by focusing on the whole child, right, as in our improvement efforts, and also using the whole community in all of our improvement efforts. So I think those strengths give, again, position Reading really well, and also position Reading well to take advantage of some of those opportunities to go to the next level. So I read a little bit about, through the superintendent focus surveys and other things about what are those opportunities to move Reading from really good to that next level. And I think the conversations yesterday really solidified a few themes for me. And these also align with things that I'm passionate about as a leader. First is the opportunity to take academic outcomes to the next level. So I've heard from a lot of family members and teachers to say that right now Reading's in a solid place with student, academic outcomes. But there's an opportunity to even take that to the next level. And I'm someone throughout my career that I pride myself on being a strong instructional leader. Right? I have been able to move, student outcomes forward as a teacher, as a principal, and now as a central office, member and administrator. This is something that I pride myself on, as strong instructional leadership, and doing that in a way that also builds positive culture. That people will get behind that. The teachers, staff, students will believe in that, and that'll build a positive culture. The second opportunity I've heard a lot of conversations around areas to grow in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how do we ensure that every child in the Reading Public School has success? And I think that my background in education has been all about ensuring that every child, regardless of race, socioeconomic status, disability status, is positioned to do really well academically, and also feels valued, feels seen, feels heard in their school experience. And then the last sort of other trend that I've heard about as an opportunity to grow is just in thinking about post-pandemic education. So this is not unique to Reading, right? But Reading, like many communities, is at a crossroads with recovering from the pandemic is step one, but then also using that as an opportunity to innovate. And I've heard community members excited about the opportunity of doing something differently, right, as we get through the pandemic, and not just trying to return to what we did before. And I think that throughout my career, I've been someone who's approached complex problems by thinking outside the box, by thinking innovatively, by using the creative ideas from the people around me to try to lead important change. So I share all that to say I am not applying to any superintendency. I'm applying to the superintendent position in the Reading Public Schools. because I am really compelled by the strengths in the district, which I think serve at the foundation of the district, and I'm also really compelled by these opportunities to even take the district to the next level and work with the community to do that. So again, thank you for the opportunity tonight. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Tom. Very good. So the first committee questions from Tom Wise.
Good evening, Tom. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Mr. Wise, thank you.
You have answered a lot of this question already in your opening statement. So
Okay.
take it and massage it to work a little bit more into it if you wouldn't mind. There's 3 parts to it, some of which you've already addressed. What appeals to you specifically about coming to work for Reading Public Schools? What are some areas where you see a need for change or that you would like to build upon? Some of that you've already addressed. Further, how do you see your particular skill sets working effectively for us, and why do your skills match our needs? And maybe that's the one we should spend the most time on.
Thank you. So again, I think I did address some of this in the opening statement. If I had read the question before, I probably would have done a little different angle on the opening, so thank you for giving me the opportunity to dive a little deeper on part 3 there. I'd say one thing I would like to say too, I would like to talk about part 1 really quick about what appeals to me. Say, I also recognize that I would be stepping into into the Reading Public Schools as a first-year superintendent. And I would say that what that means to me is I feel very confident that I've had the best of training for this role, right? Especially this year, my work in the Medford Public Schools. I feel like I'm in a program that's designed to prepare superintendents for this role. And I think my past roles as a teacher and principal prepare me for this. At the same time, I am stepping into a role as a first-time superintendent, and I get that. And what that means is I need to lean heavily on the people around me, and the people around me who know the community really well, the people who have specific expertise in different areas of the community of the work. So I am someone who would enter in with the greatest of humility to work with the people around me, recognizing that even if I was not a first-year superintendent, right, I would lean heavily on them, but I would lean heavily on the people around me. And something that appeals to me in Reading is knowing I would be leaning heavily on a really strong central office team. I would be leaning heavily on a really strong staff of principals, right? A really strong school committee, a really strong group of parents, right? So these are things that I feel like, as I think about Reading, I think is also something that's really appealing to me. In terms of an area of need to change, I would like to talk a little bit about, I'm just looking through the questions quick to see if it's coming. I've heard a lot of questions relating to race and how we're going to talk about race in schools and how we're going to prepare our students to take on anti-racist work. So I'm just quickly scanning to see if that's a question that's coming. If not, I'll take that on now. Again, looks like it's coming a little bit later, but I'll share here quickly that I have heard a strong appetite from students, from teachers, right, from school leaders, that they want to take this next step in being able to create more inclusive and anti-racist schools. So I think as I see an area for a need to change, I see that is work that a lot of our school communities need to take on. That's critical work that we need to take on, that we should have been taking on for a long time if we haven't. And something that I see a major appetite of people in the community, especially those in the school, to take on that work. In terms of the particular skill set working effectively and why does that match the needs, I think that if you had the chance to chat with people who I've worked with, people that I've worked with when I was a teacher, people that I worked with when I was a principal, people that I work with now, as a superintendent resident in Medford, I think you'd hear a few common themes, right? I am someone who is the ultimate believer in team, right? And I think this comes from like who I am growing up. I grew up in a bigger family. I grew up and we thought of ourselves as a team, again, albeit dysfunctional at times, but we were a team, right? I also feel like I grew up part of sports teams. That's a huge part of who I am is athletics. And I, learned how to operate as part of a team through growing up playing sports. Same thing now with a bigger family, being a father of 4. We have a larger house. We are working together constantly as a team. And I've centered all of my leadership work around team. So I think something of my particular skill set is building strong teams. Again, as I shared before, I don't always have all the answers. And I can assure you there's people in the organization who are much smarter than me and know much more than me about all different areas of the work, right? My job is to bring people together as a team and get people to function well, and that's, one of my greatest strengths. I also feel like another strength is the area of being able to work with divergent viewpoints. So I felt like when I was a principal of the Bates Elementary in Salem, we had people with some very different opinions on what student success should look like and what our path to improvement should be. Same thing now in the Medford Public Schools, right? As we talk about the reopening of schools, we navigated really challenging conversations about reopening of schools with people with some very, very different perspectives on what we should do. And a lot of those conversations I have been at the front leading and facilitating, so I feel I'm very comfortable navigating challenging conversations with different viewpoints. And I'll speak about that a little bit with our reopening efforts later. Very comfortable bringing people together with different ideas, and very comfortable trying to get people rowing in the same direction towards what's best for students. And then I think one other thing I'll share is I am just someone who is a great listener. I've joked with a few people yesterday that even my wife, she can't attest to me right now, would share that I'm a good listener in our toughest of times. And I listen not so I can come up with my own response back, but listen to really try to understand. And I've found that some of the most effective people that I've been around in education are the ones who can actually not always speak the best, but the ones who can listen the best. And I really pride myself on someone who is a strong listener. And then I guess one more thing really quick is just student focus. It's all about students. What's best for students has to be at the core, and that's something that's always driven my leadership.
Thank you very much.
So I'll allow any committee members that would like to ask any follow-up to that question, or if not, Carla Nazaro will ask the next question.
Great. Tom, it's so nice to meet you, and I'm really pleased and happy that you're here, and look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. My question is, decision-making is a two-edged sword. Some situations call for decisiveness right at the start, while others involve consensus building. Could you please tell us a situation where you were decisive and how it worked out for you? And also, please tell us about a time when you were not as decisive enough and what you learned from it.
I think that's a great question, and I think that gets at the crux of just the challenge of moving change and the challenge of dealing with difference of opinions and navigating different ideas. So I think a couple of things when it comes to decision making, right? I think that as this sort of example lays out, there are times when a leader needs to be decisive and clear about what the path forward is, and that needs to be made in the moment, right? And there's not necessarily the opportunity or time for community feedback, right? Now, that's sort of one, I would think, distinct set of decision-making sort of opportunities. I think there's another bigger set, which these big decisions that are supposed to be made about strategic planning, action planning, visioning, right, where it really requires people to come around with a divergence of opinions and try to work together to solve a problem. I'd like to give the example that I'd like to share about is to share the story of like our reopening efforts in the Medford Public Schools. So to fast forward a little bit, currently in the Medford Public Schools, we have all of our students back in. We have our highest need students in 4 days a week. We have our K through 8 in, or actually I should say K to 5 in 2 days a week with some concurrent instruction. So, having students in front of you live and also students remotely at home. And then, high school students back in, middle school back in, 2 days a week live, and also with the concurrent instruction happening too. So 2 days a week of live instruction. Now I share that to say that's the background for where we got to. That, was, as I'm sure it was in Reading, a really challenging process to get there. So we sat down in I would say, late spring to say, how are we going to even envision the reopening of schools? And what we decided as a central office team was that we're going to create a process where we got divergent viewpoints around the table early. So what we set up a process. We're going to create 4 work groups: a remote work group, a hybrid / in-person work group, a operations work group, and then a communication stakeholder engagement work group. And each of those teams would be comprised of a group of parents, teachers, principals, central office staff, all with very, very different opinions on what it should look like. And I can still distinctly remember in that moment, we had said, maybe we should just kind of create this plan and sort of form it, right? And then try to get community buy-in along the way. And we paused and we told ourselves, while it is going to lead to a challenging and a complex and a difficult process by involving over 100 stakeholders with very different viewpoints at the table, we feel that's the only way to really get to a point where we're going to get buy-in from the majority of people and get consensus of people rowing in the right direction. Now, central to that was I would say, a steering committee, which we called, which oversaw the work of all the workers and tried to bring the plan together. So I was the facilitator and the leader of the steering committee. And on the steering committee, we had people with very, very different opinions. People who felt that we should not have students back in school, right, until there was no risk. People who felt that we needed everyone back in full time, right, and everything in between. Right? All with different levels of political power, right, and relationships and things. So there's just the decision making was not just what do we do, but it's also knowing people with different influences and power and things like that too. So throughout the process, I think there were two things that led us to where we were. First, we were committed to listening to one another. We listened to people with very different viewpoints in those sessions, right? And without actually listening and seeking to understand, we would not have been to where we were. Second piece, we committed to collaborating. We committed to working through our disagreements, working through the challenges that we saw, working through anything where we thought there was vastly different approach than what we should do to ultimately come together to sort of a united reopening plan. Now, so I think that goes back to my idea about decision making was this was not a decision to make where we said we're going to have our 5 members of our senior leadership team sit behind, make a decision, and then try to get buy-in from people in the community. This is something that impacted so many people, that was so nuanced and complex. We need to bring all of those ideas to the table right away, so that way we're coming out with a plan that people feel good about and that people can get behind. And our plan has been, really well supported by our teachers. I think is really well supported by our families, well supported by our students, and also something that our central office staff feels really good about as well. I think there were moments in there where we try to, I think about, for example, where we try to be decisive to make a pivot about, I would say this, our initial plan was to have the hybrid model start right away. And we try to make a pivot in the moment, sort of last minute, actually looking at something that Reading put forward, of phasing in a hybrid approach. And the community at that point had felt that we sort of had generated so much momentum around the hybrid approach and the hybrid model that actually introducing this phased-in thing after we had sort of gone through all the work collaboratively was something that surprised the community. In our heads, we had felt that wasn't that much of a shift. It's the same model, it's just phasing it in. Looking back, we wish that was something that we had then sort of brought to the table earlier and had the whole sort of consensus on that instead of raising that sort of later on in the process. So I share that example because I think that's a strong example of just my approach to decision making, which is bring people around the table around challenging, complex issues, but then also being honest and open around there were moments in there that we were too decisive and that backfired, right? Especially when we tried to make decisions that really should have included a broader, constituency.
Thank you. John Parks.
What actions have you taken as a leader to ensure that all students make effective progress in your district? What were the outcomes? And as you plan to close the achievement gap and help all students reach the highest possible goal in Reading, how will you think about the social and emotional well-being of a student?
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Great question again, and a few layers to this too. We were talking about looking at achievement gap and making sure ensuring the success of all students, and also looking at the social and emotional well-being too of students. Let me start with, I'm actually going to start with the social and emotional piece. I shared something that I think was deeply personal several times in this process, but I wanted to make sure I was open about this now too, is that 9 years ago, earlier this week, we lost my father-in-law to suicide as a result of mental health and depression. And my wife and I in that moment had said, we are never going to shy away from talking about mental health. We are never going to, shy away from having that conversation with our students and our loved ones. And that's really translated into my own work as a leader, right? When I was a principal, I would say, we are going to push really hard for high-quality academic outcomes, but that is not at the expense of the development, social and emotionally, of students. And that's the same thing as we work in the med firm around people who are like-minded, that we are going to push really hard for academic outcomes, but that is not at the sake of developing, students who are healthy, feel good about themselves, right, and feel empowered. So, I share that because that's deeply personal, my core, and how I approach leadership. And it's also interesting because a lot of people who know me will say, this person is intently focused on academic outcomes, right? And it's important to know that it's also, right, and also just important is this SEL piece. So, in terms of academic achievement gaps, I feel that I have worked throughout my career in education in communities with some pretty significant achievement gaps. So I started my career as a teacher in the Boston Public Schools. I was a middle school special education ESL teacher at the Frederick Middle School in Dorchester. and I would say some pretty and I was a middle school teacher with many students who are coming to me with reading, doing math at a second and third grade level. Right? So knowing that there was obviously a major urgency in closing those gaps, or those students are going to be, on a path to have a really difficult time in their career moving forward. Also, I was principal at Bates Elementary in Salem, which is an urban elementary school located, a little bit down the road, also with some major achievement gaps, right? So I feel like that's been at the core of of my leadership as a teacher, as a principal, and also now in Medford, right? Same thing. And I'd say in all of these communities, I think a lot of the trends have been similar, and similar what we could guess sort of across the state too. When we're looking at achievement gaps, we're looking at, a lot of times our economically disadvantaged students, right? Not achieving with their, with their peers, right? Also students with disabilities, looking at our ELs, and oftentimes looking at our students of color, right? So when we're looking at students, those are the gaps that sort of I have seen in my experience, and I think are pretty consistent with gaps that we see across the country. Now, a couple things I think about, just like what is the work of closing the achievement gap? I think the first thing is high quality tier 1 instruction. Right? A lot of times people will jump to saying, we need to plan out all these interventions to make sure to close the gap, which I think really matters. Like, interventions really matter. But what matters even before we get to the interventions piece is ensuring that we have high quality teaching and learning in every single classroom. And that's sort of the best measure, like up front, to be able to close sort of the achievement gap. Second thing, I think in terms of like achievement gaps, we need to be able to have data systems that allow us to see how are our students progressing and allow us to see it in like real time. So if we're talking at the classroom, at the school level, we're saying, how do we know how students are doing at every point in time academically? What's the data that we have to show how students are progressing? And how do we know, how do we use that data to then make changes in our instructional approach? One of the biggest things that we did is, during my time at Bates Elementary, we implemented what we called 6-week data cycles. So every 6 weeks, we would get new formative assessment data where we would look at for students at the student level, at the classroom level, and then sort of at, even the grade level. And we said, what are some of the trends that we're seeing? This would be all of the people who work with those students in one room. So all of the grade level teachers, the special educators, the speech language pathologists, right? Any paraprofessionals, all in the room together, trying to problem solve to see, here's the trends that we're seeing, right? And here's the instructional changes that we're going to make as a result. But if there is not a data system in place to figure out how students are doing, it's going to be very difficult just to look at end of the year data and then say, oh, here's what we should have done, right? So we need data in the moment to be able to make pivots and adjustments. And then the last thing I think about as achievement gap is I think we have to think about what are other ways, other barriers for students, and figuring out ways that we can eliminate those barriers that are not academically related. For example, we'll often use the analogy that sometimes you go to the doctor and someone has a cough, and they'll treat the cough, right? But really there's something underlying that. And I think about this the same thing sometimes when our children come to school, is that they're struggling academically. We provided high quality tier 1 supports. We've looked at our interventions, our tier 2 and tier 3 supports, and the student is still struggling. And a lot of times when we pull back the layers, we realize that the student may be hungry. We realize that the student may be dealing with a mental health crisis and can't access the curriculum. We may realize that there's something going on at home with the families, right, that's prohibiting this child from engaging and accessing the curriculum. So as a school community, ways that creating systems where you can start to identify other barriers and being able to eliminate those barriers. And I'd share one thing, I think something that would be really proud of, which I think is a really critical piece in this, is an underutilized way to close sort of achievement gaps is using families and partnering with families as partners in children's academic learning. Far too often, parents don't know how they can support their children's learning at home. I think about as a parent of 4, I often, as an educator, don't know how to help my kindergarten and second grader with the work they're coming home with. Right? I try my best, but I don't know what it is that I can do to push them forward. So when I was a principal at Bates, something that we did was we implemented academic parent-teacher teams. And these are where parents would come together with teachers 3 times a year, and they would do 3 things. They would first talk about what's expected developmentally of the child at that point of the year. 2, hear how their child is doing and get some specific data of how their child's doing towards those targets. And 3rd, get some games and resources that they can use at home to support their children's learning. So for example, we would see, when we would go out, for dinner, I'd see some of the kids playing their dice games, with their families at the table at the 99. You start having conversations with families about What does it mean to move from a level A text to a level B text, right? What are some of those questions that you can be asking your child at home when you're reading that can really prepare them to take that jump? But we started having conversations with families, and we realized that when we used families as the child's first teacher and really empowered them to be partners in their child's education, that achievement went through the roof. So I think that that is just something that a lot of people don't necessarily connect to the achievement gap directly, but I think is a huge lever in improving student outcomes.
Thank you, Tom. Tom?
Just a quick follow-up, Tom, if you wouldn't mind. Number one on that closing achievement gap you listed was the high-quality Tier 1 instruction. And one of the key things to the input of instruction is the curriculum tools and materials available for that. You could spend a little bit of time about the evaluation of curriculum tools that you would use in that process. How do you assess what ours are, what might be working, what might not be working, and then the change that might be necessary, if anything, to address that number one item on your list?
Yeah, great. Thank you for the follow-up. I would say the quickest answer to that is we need to position the people who know the curriculum the best to make these decisions, right? So if we think about we're making decisions about early literacy, right? The people who know early literacy the best should be the ones making the decisions. We think about our K through 2 teachers. We think about our literacy coach. We think about our reading specialists, right? We think about our ELA coordinators, right? We think about people who know that work the best and positioning them to be able to make these decisions. Right? I can't tell you how many times I've been a part of curriculum initiatives that have just been top-down, sort of district vetted, and then put sort of on teachers. And while they may be high-quality programs, right, you are not going to have the buy-in on the program unless it's something that the teachers feel is that, as the experts, is best for their children. So I think that starts with a process of getting the right people around the table, and the right people are the people who know that work the best. I think the second part of that work is using, I know the common phrase would be research-based, right? But being able to go out and vet, using your curriculum experts to vet curriculums that have been used sort of in other places, talk to other districts who have been piloting different things, and to think about what that may look like in implementation. So I think about if you get curriculum that has sort of been vetted by organizations that you trust, people that you trust, you get the right people around the table making these decisions, and you empower them to make the decisions, you're generally going to end up in a better place, not only in the selection of a curriculum, but as you're rolling it out and trying to get buy-in from all the different stakeholders.
Thank you.
Thank you. Erin Gaffin.
Hi, Tom.
Aaron.
Please give me a couple examples of how you have fostered growth and developed leadership capacity in your staff.
Great question. I think, and this is something that I think is core to who I am as a person and as a leader. One of my favorite phrases in education is Kaizen. I don't know if anyone know Kaizen, which is a continuous daily improvement, right? And I think that's something that I pride myself on in modeling, is that I am going to be someone who is going to continuously try to improve. So even before I give examples of leading others through this work, I just want to also show that this is something I feel like I need to model as the leader. Something that I would consistently do as a principal is collect anonymous feedback. What am I doing well? What am I not doing well? What could I be doing better? And then share that out publicly so everyone sees what they're saying, right? There's nothing to hide behind. And then talking about how you're going to use that data to make yourself better. Same thing that we're doing right now sort of in Medford is we're having a lot of listening sessions. And in the listening sessions, we're listening to people about what's working, what's not working, right? What could we be doing better? And we're starting to do that work as we're visioning sort of post-pandemic education. What's working for you now? What's not working? And a lot of time that implicates us as leaders. But we need to model this process of taking feedback as part of our own leadership growth and development. I'd like to share one specific example, which I think is a real recent example. Is I've been tasked this year. So I should actually describe, before I take this on, describe a little bit about my role right now in Medford. I know some people who I haven't had a chance to chat with. My role currently in Medford, I'm a superintendent resident, which means I am working side by side with the superintendent on everything related to superintendent level leadership. Backing up a little bit, when I made the decision to enroll sort of in the program that I'm in, it was when I was a principal. I loved being a principal. I was really proud of the progress that our school was making, but I felt that we couldn't take that next step forward without sort of more autonomy, without being able to make some decisions that we knew was best in our school community. And I wanted to be a superintendent who would position principals to make decisions about their school community so that they could position teachers to be able to do what they do best, and that's make decisions in the best interest of their children. So I looked at a lot of different opportunities or pathways of what it could look like to enter into the superintendency, and I chose the pathway that I thought would be best for me, and that was enrolling full-time in the EDLD doctoral program at Harvard, which is designed to prepare, they would say, transformational district-level leaders. And I think that for me to take the past 3 years solely focused on preparing to be a district-level superintendent has been, I think, a really worthwhile experience that has allowed me to really dive into the complexities, the nuances of leading districts. I've been working, coaching, supporting principal development across the country. I'm a district reviewer for DESE, so coaching districts in their improvement efforts, trying to bring alignment and coherence to their work. And then also now I'm a superintendent resident in Medford, again, where I'm working side by side with, I think, is one of the best superintendents you're ever going to find. One of the best people, the best humans you'll ever find, and also one of the best leaders. Now I share that because I say in my role now, she has tasked me with revamping our principal professional development in the district, saying that currently this current structure, right, or previously was focused primarily on logistical updates and operations. And she wanted that to shift to be now taking more of an instructional focus. So I've worked with our principals to revamp what principal PD looks like. So we've designed it to collaboratively, and it has sort of 3 major pieces. The first, what we call one-to-one coaching. So principals will sit down collaboratively with myself, with the other assistant superintendents, the superintendent, develop instructionally related professional practice goals. And then throughout the year, we are collaboratively, meeting up, checking in, seeing how they're doing towards these goals. For example, we have one assistant principal who's working on trying to revamp the school to reflect the best practices in restorative justice. So we've set some collaborative goals. Every 3 weeks, we're coming together, we're talking about his progress towards doing that work. Removing some barriers that may be in his way, and also kind of supporting, connecting him with other schools and resources or people that are doing this work well. So that one-to-one coaching, we feel, has been a way to individualize professional development for coaches, give principals what they feel like they need, and also foster and build collaborative relationships between sort of principals and their supervisors. Second structure that we've put together is called Network PD, or Communities of Practice, and this is where principals come together, share best practices, or collaboratively share problems of practice that they're facing. What we learned is that when we let principals collaborate with each other, support each other, disseminate best practices, their skills, right, in instructional leadership, and also their confidence in the work and the culture amongst the group has really, gone through the roof. They are an amazing group of principals. They are the most, talented, caring, dedicated principals. And using their expertise, creating the structure to get them together and working and sharing best practices, we think has been instrumental in developing them as leaders. And then the third structure we put in place, we call SLATE, which is just related to operations, logistics, nuts and bolts. We feel strongly if you don't have a separate structure, everything will become about nuts and bolts and operations and logistics. We need to keep that work separate, talking about HVAC, talking about pool testing, talking about those different things that are not instructionally focused, but still really matter. So I share all that to say that this year we've made a major commitment to focus on the development of principals because we feel that principal leadership really, really matters, and we really need to invest in our principal leadership, and that's going to have a huge impact sort of on the organization as a whole.
Thank you.
Chuck?
Yes, Carla.
So you did all of those things while opening up the schools in Medford for a pandemic, during a pandemic. So you did all of that training with principals and collaborating with principals, and in addition to helping Medford schools open up.
And I would say this, Mrs. R, that's a good point. I would say this, is that we thought about, is this too much for our principals to take on right now? We said, no, actually this is the perfect time, because if we expect our principals just to operate in silos and reopen schools and not have this type of networking support, right, and collaborative work, we're setting them up to fail, right? So we thought that, yes, while it was a lift to get this off the ground, it was actually the perfect time, because now, more than ever, we need our principals to be collaborative and supportive and aligned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Sean Brandt will ask the next question.
Thanks, Chuck. And thanks, Tom, for being here. Really appreciate it. How would you hold educators at all levels accountable for delivering effective instruction? And could you please share some examples of what steps or actions you would take to foster a strong partnership between special education and general education educators?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Brandt. I'll start with the first piece about accountability. I think that something's really important about accountability. And I'm someone who loves accountability. I want to be held accountable, and I want to be held to a high bar. And I think that if you asked anyone who has worked for me, I think they would say that I hold them to a high bar, but I also provide them with that same level of support. So I don't think, I have never met educators who have shied away from accountability. I have seen a lot of times we expect things but don't provide that same level of support. And let me give you an example. We had a lot of conversations in Medford this year as it related to like the budget, and we knew it was going to be tight financial times. And we really wanted to raise the bar for what remote instruction looked like. Yet teachers were operating using these like old Chromebooks. How can we raise the bar for teachers for what remote instruction is going to look like if we don't actually provide them with the tools that allows them to do this work well? So then we worked, to now everyone across the district has new MacBooks. And we feel like, okay, if we're providing the tools, and that was just one example of a tool, I think we can raise the bar in sort of what we expect instruction to look like. But if we have, internet going in and out all the time, these devices can't handle it, how can we raise the bar? So I think that speaks to just, I don't think people shy away from accountability, right? And I think that people also want the same levels of support. So now, like, how do you hold educators, accountable? I think that, first of all, you need to have conversations about outcomes, right? And I'm not talking about outcomes just in MCAS scores, right? But MCAS and all of the other, other things that really matter to us. So for example, I know the high school, community has done a lot of good work recently with the Portrait of a Graduate. And it seems like, so if the community is designing what they want Reading Public School students to walk away from the high school knowing, thinking, and being able to do, shouldn't those be the same things that we should all also hold ourselves accountable to, right, throughout that process, right? That's what I would hope I would be held accountable to, is are we delivering on what we want for our students when they graduate? So I think being able to set some specific metrics around, if we want our students to be able to do these things, what does that look like in staff actions? And what are some of the things that we expect for staff? So I think that is like, when I think about accountability, I don't want people to think about MCAS accountability, which MCAS matters, is a part of it, but thinking more broadly about sort of what metrics we're using to hold people accountable. I also think like the biggest way to hold people accountable is just by being visible and by being present. I will tell you that I am someone who prided myself as a principal. I was in every classroom every day. That is not something I would commit to in the Reading Public Schools as district superintendent, but with that same spirit that I am going to be in classrooms, right, observing instruction. I'm going to be in classrooms with principals talking about instruction, right? Our principals are going to be in classrooms talking about instruction, right? As a district team, we're going to be in classrooms talking about instruction. We're going to be in common planning time meetings. I mean, just being visible so people know that this work matters, I think is really important. And then I also think, at the same thing, like as you are visible and as you are present, ensuring that there's the right systems of sort of collaboration for people to work well, effectively. Common planning time is one example. High quality professional development, another example. Those are other examples of support. Now, I think about like strong partnership between special education and general education teacher. I felt when I was a teacher that as a special education teacher, I felt that a lot of times I was out on a silo, right? I felt that I didn't often know what was happening for my students in the general education setting, and not to the fault of anyone, right? But there just wasn't any systems for us to be able to collaborate, right? Or to talk about students, to norm and calibrate around instruction. So I think that as we talk about like a partnership, I think about the most important thing is that there are systems during the day, whether that's through common planning time sessions, whether that's even through like 5 or 10-minute huddles, for teachers to be able to come together and to be able to talk about student needs. Right? But far too often, right, the special education teacher and the general education teacher are both working incredibly hard, yet they haven't had the opportunity to calibrate and to discuss how things are going, and then they're not aligned in sort of what's happening. So it's creating these opportunities for them to be aligned and on the same page for what instruction looks like. And I want to say, like, what I think is the glue between the special education realm and also the general education is the family, right? This is not something that there should just be a partnership between, special education teachers, general education teachers, without the family, right, and the parents and the caregivers is that glue that really holds that relationship together. So again, while I can go into some more specifics if you want to talk about just some maybe some more concrete structures, but I also just want to say to emphasize what I think is the most important thing is actually setting up systems of collaboration because I feel like at schools and districts, that far too often that those systems of collaborations don't exist.
Sean?
Yeah, I would like to ask a follow-up, which marries some of your answer to that question, some of your answer to the last question. You talked a lot about high standards. You talked a lot about accountability. We heard a lot about high standards, in some of our previous discussions as well. And in the last answer, you talked about how, as a principal, you felt like taking that next step and becoming a superintendent and creating autonomy for principals is really important. I won't put you on the spot and ask you to step on a third rail and talk about school choice in Reading, per se. But how do you think that school choice, in your experience in Salem, sort of factors into your thinking about accountability and principal autonomy and things like that?
Yeah, great question. And if you're leading me into a path where I could be stepping this, I'll go for it. So we'll see if I would say this. I think principals first on the empowerment piece. I feel strongly that the people who know best about what needs to happen in a school are the teachers and the educators, the paraprofessionals who are living the day in, day out with students. Now, I also think principals are the ones who should be keeping a pulse on what their teachers want and need, and therefore they can represent, or should be able to represent, a lot of the voices in their school community about what their school community needs, right? I think that the more that we empower our principals to make decisions around curriculum, the more that we empower our principals to make decisions about hiring, the more that we empower our principals to make decisions about specific structures they're using in the school, they know what their school community needs, and I think we need to empower them to make those decisions, right? Now, in terms of school choice, I think Salem was a little bit of a different context because Salem didn't use the neighborhood school model because there were certain spots of the town that hired higher populations of students of lower socioeconomic status, right? So having sort of just neighborhood schools would then have higher pockets and concentrations of students who were economically disadvantaged, right? So they had a model where students could choose, and there was sort of a lottery to pick the, sort of the right choice. Now, I don't know enough about the Reading context to know whether there's an appetite for that, whether that would be a great decision, whether that's sort of even something on the radar. I can't speak to that. But I think it can speak to like a tension that I know exists a lot is that do you allow schools to be different, right, and to each kind of take on their own identity? Or do you sort of require consistency to sort of, for the sake of knowing that what someone's getting at Wood End is the same thing that they're getting at Barrows, right? And I tend to think that the more that schools can develop an identity, right, the more that schools can develop certain things that make their school unique, that make their school special, right, I think that schools should be empowered to do that. And I think we should try to replicate those best practices sort of across the other school communities. We deal with this conversation all the time in Medford where we have two middle schools. I don't know if you've ever been in the Medford middle schools, are almost right next to each other. And it's interesting because there's a lot of people will be frustrated if we do something in one middle school and then we don't do it in the other. But at the same time, if a principal has an idea here, it may not work over here. So we're constantly toggling about what's the best approach. I tend to think in these that empowering the principals to develop what they think is best, if something's really working in one school, trying to think about is that a practice we can replicate in another? And if not, then also doing what that school feels is best for their own sort of unique needs. Now, it gets challenging if a school is struggling, right? If there's a school that's not demonstrating sort of the outcomes that you need. And I think that then it's the superintendent's role to work with that, closely with that principal to make sure they can put the right systems and structures in place where they are getting results sort of at the same sort of level as the other schools. Thank you.
Okay. So I'll ask the next. In the event a school committee member crosses into the area of operations or curriculum choices of the schools, how would you maintain the boundaries and secure that the work and decisions are made by the appropriate members of the leadership team and our educators?
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. And I know there's a case study that's coming tonight, and I think that relates closely to this in a lot of ways. So I might move through this a little bit quicker just because I think that I'll hit on a lot of the topics related to this and roles and responsibilities when I talk about the case study. So I will take this chance. I see like the first part about school committee member crosses over the line in this. I've found like in our work, we work really closely with the Medford school committee. We found, I think, a few things that are really important to maintaining sort of this positive relationship and collaborative relationship. The first is that under any circumstances, there can't be any surprises for the school committee. Right? And I'll give you an example. We had, a couple of weeks ago, we had one of our middle school teams that went out, that had all of their staff who needed a quarantine. So we had to make a decision. Do we still have the students come into the building and, access instruction remote, even though they're going to be on a computer all day, right, in the school? Or do we make the decision to say, learn from home because we just, you're going to be remote anyways, right? That's one of those decisions that, is in the purview of the superintendent's team to make that decision. Yet that is one that needs to be, sort of keeping the school committee in the loop on that process, because that would be a major surprise if the school committee were to find out sort of that decision was made and not know why or how that decision was made and how factors were balanced and sort of considered. I'm sure some of you were wondering, we ultimately decided to have our students still come to school, right? We thought the social and emotional impact of having them in the building was more beneficial than saying to keep them at home. And families, obviously, who wanted to keep their children home could. But that idea that no surprises, right? There are things that are in the purview of, each, and there is that line of managing and governing, but there can't be any surprises for the committee. It does not position you to be able to, speak with constituents, talk with constituents effectively. Second thing we found is that we need to have proactive systems of communication. We can't wait for something like that to pop up just to talk. So there's an example I really like of Mitchell Chesser, the late Secretary of Education, who used to call all the board members the day before every meeting and just to check in. Hey, here's what we're talking about. Is there any questions or any concerns or anything on your mind, anything that you're thinking? Just to make sure that they were in the loop on things and how they were happening. And we feel in Medford, when we've had our most success, it's when we've been proactive of just having these sort of structures in place to communicate with school committee members. And then the last thing I'll say about the school committee members is we need to have constant communication around that line and that boundary about what is governing, what's managing, and sort of what's in our purview, what's in sort of the school committee's lane. And that's hard, and it's complicated. And I know, like, on paper, it may seem straightforward, but it's not. And I know especially a lot of you are not solely school committee members. You're parents, your neighbors, your coaches. Like, you're involved in the community in a lot of other ways. So the roles get really jumbled. So it's constantly being able to have the conversations with each other of saying, hey, I think that can you let us handle this, right? Here's how we're going to handle this, right? Do you have concerns with how we're handling this? Would you, any feedback on how we can be doing this better, right? And being willing to be open with each other sort of in that relationship. And I think with a lot of the members of the Medford School Committee, we have that relationship where we can have those open dialogues, give each other sort of, be open with where those lines might be crossed, sort of on either direction. But I think constantly being able to have those conversations in an open way is critically important.
Thank you, Tom. Aaron Gaffin has the next question.
What culture would you create and what guidance would you give about teaching equity and social justice? In a town where the need for this work is sometimes a point of disagreement, in your role as superintendent, how would you lead this work?
Thank you, Ms. Gaffin. I'd like to be, very clear about this one, like up front, and I think that our schools need to take on the work of being anti-racist, right? And there's absolutely no place for hate, no place for racism in schools, right? And I think if I am not abundantly clear in that right off the bat, right, I am not being honest with who I am as a leader and what my values are. So, and I know that everyone sort of has different opinions on, what does that look like? What should we talk about? What we shouldn't. I hope what we can all come to agreement on is that there is no place for hate or racism to start. So I think about like leading this work. Again, this is work I feel like was central to our work as my time as a principal. And I feel like it's central to my work as a central office administrator in Medford. And I think I'd like to share just a couple examples which I think illuminate how I might approach this work. First thing is I think that the leader of the organization needs to be able to talk about race. I am someone, as a white man, does not have it all figured out. And I am very openly on my own journey of understanding my own identity as a white man and what that means, right? And I'm open about that. And I feel like I've grown a long way. But I need to be able to get myself out there and to be able to talk about race, even if that means I'm going to make a mistake from time to time. But a leader sets the tone by being willing to talk about race, especially when race can be a difficult topic to talk about. And I think especially a leader needs to be able to implicate themselves sometimes in this work. So I think about an example. When I was principal of the Bates, there was an achievement gap, right? We had in one way, it was our students of color were disproportionately disciplined, which we would say, whether that's even something as extreme as suspension or even indoor recess or, loss of privileges, whatever it may be. And there was a disproportionality between our students of color and our white students. Now, as the principal of the school, we all know who that sits on, right? Who the one who's primary in these conversations and roles, and that sits on me, right? So amongst our leadership team, it's being willing to say, like, hey, what's that, like, what am I doing here? What are some things that I may be missing? Where, like, could my own bias be getting in the way, right? And I think opening up those conversations, but if a leader of the organization is willing to open up and have these harder conversations, I feel like that sets the tone, right? Before I'm telling other people how they should be doing this work, I'm just going to be open and honest about my own shortcomings and areas where I need to improve. So I think that's one piece. I think about the second piece is being willing to listen, right? So I haven't got to like what I would even do yet, because I think the first thing is sort of being willing to implicate yourself, then being able to listen. I think in many communities, talking to colleagues who are superintendents and friends who are superintendents, and even, alongside, Dr. Ward Vincent, this summer we received a lot of calls about former students who would like to share their experience as students of color and how they felt treated, valued, or not valued in the school community. It is easy sometimes, to be able to dismiss those, to say, oh, that was a long time ago, or maybe that wasn't how they meant it, or to try to sort of protect it in that way. But our obligation is to listen, right? So is to open our ears and to listen, and particularly listen to the experiences of our students of color, our educators of color, right? Because that's not an experience that I can, right? I've lived, right? So being willing to listen to those experiences, I think, is critically important. Now I'd like to get to the point. I think that's like the question here says, what culture would you create? I think a leader sets the culture when they're willing to do the work and they're willing to listen. And I think also there needs to be some action. So some of the work that we've done in Medford recently is that we said we're going to start this work with our administrators. And this is not to say the work's not happening in all the schools. Principals are leading this work. Teachers are leading this work. Students are leading this work. This is all happening. We said right now we're going to start sort of our work of doing this work together alongside all of our administrators. So we're all rating everyday anti-racism, which I know a lot of it, the administrative team in Reading has done as well. And what we try to do is not only read the text, but that each time talk about what are some action steps that we can take away with that are concrete. For example, this past week we had someone who said, I'm pulling out a chapter which talks about just the visual representation of who's around, right? And I think right now if you look around, I think this is more of I think a reflective of our world, sort of in a lot of ways, of who's up on the walls here in Reading. We looked at can we look at all of our classrooms and our hallways, and who are the people that we're celebrating, uplifting, right? In a lot of cases, right, they were predominantly, white people, right? And I think that I look back, and that's a lot of things I fell into that trap as a, principal too, in my work. So I think it's being able to say, we're going to read text, but we're also going to read it to say, then now what are we going to do, right? And those may be small steps, right? But those are steps sort of moving the work forward. I'd also like to share too on this. I have just sensed a great amount of leadership in this work from the Reading principals and reading their newsletters and the work that they're taking on, how they're leading this work in their school community. A great work from teachers and how teachers are taking on anti-racist work with students in the community and also with students and a lot of the leadership work that students are taking on. I think the organization is called We the Youth, that's taking on some of this work. And I spoke with a student yesterday who was really proud of the work that students are doing. And we want students to feel empowered in this work. So I share all of that to say, I am someone who is going to listen. I am someone who's going to try to work with people with very different perspectives across all different issues. And I think there can be a lot of conversation about how are we teaching, what are we teaching, and I think that that's very fair. I don't think there is any conversation for me in terms of being able to say we as an organization are going to root out racism and root out hate in our school community. And I hope that's something that all in the community can get behind, sort of that, at least that charge.
Thank you, Tom. Carla Nazaro.
Great. Thank you, Tom. The next question. At the time you begin your tenure in the Reading Public School District, the country community will have likely emerged or will have begun emerging from the COVID-19 crisis. Talk about how you will re-engage staff, students, and community to a sense of normalcy moving forward. How will you build the trust and previous confidence in the Reading Public Schools?
Great question. Thank you, Mrs. Zaro. As I read this, I think about myself as a parent, and I think about myself as an educator, and every day I'm like, we can't wait for the pandemic to be over. And I know I'm not the only one thinking that way. And I also think about it a lot of times. I say, if we just hope for it to be over and hope that all of a sudden when the pandemic magically disappears, we can just revert back to the way we did things and expect that we're going to be positioned for success, it's crazy. Right? This year, in so many ways, has been incredibly taxing and challenging and tiring. And I think the challenge here is next year and beyond, I don't think is going to get any easier, right? We may not be having to juggle so much with the different instructional models of what does it look like to teach students in front of us in remote, but we're going to be dealing with students who have major gaps academically, major gaps social and emotionally, right? And are having a really difficult time sort of re-emerging and re-engaging with school, right? And that is a major, major challenge. So I would just like to say is that I see COVID-19 crisis listed here. Our first order of work is to recover and try to close those gaps for students, academically, social, and emotionally, so students are able to access school again successfully. And I think that second part of the work, right, which I think is the important part, is innovation, right? We can't just recover and think about, now we're done with that, we've got through that. We need to think about what is the future going to look like, and how do we use this as an opportunity to do things differently. I loved hearing from some of the teachers yesterday and some of the principals yesterday, who I think had some great ideas to say, I think this is an opportunity for us to do these sorts of things. So as I see COVID-19, I see visioning, I think that my work would be galvanizing and bringing people together around the vision of what post-pandemic education is going to look like in the Reading Public Schools. And I think that given the strengths that I've shared about Reading, I think that Reading should and could become sort of the model for what post-pandemic education should look like, right? This is a process that I think should involve all of the stakeholders across the community. Like as I shared about visioning, mapping out our plan for reopening the Medford Public Schools, I think re-envisioning the future of education in Reading should be a community conversation. Like that example of the portrait of a graduate is part of that work, but also more than that is also thinking about what are we teaching, right? Is it still the same core subjects and sort of the same extracurriculars, or are things that we know our students need to compete and be, and live in the world now that we're not offering, right? Are we just teaching within the four walls of our classroom? Or are we using technology in the community to think differently about where and how students learn, right? So, again, and this is not, the innovative idea should not come solely from me, but should come from the people who have these ideas the best, which are educators, our teachers, our families. And I think that the way that I will sort of get people behind this and build trust sort of is the way that I feel like I've always built trust as a leader in my past, right? I think if you, again, talk to people who have worked with me, worked for me, I think one of the things that they would say is I have developed a great sense of trust on a personal, professional level with everyone that I've worked with. And I think that a few things are important to that. First, again, a commitment to listening, right? So a commitment to understanding where people are coming from, hearing their ideas, and knowing that you are using their ideas to shape plans. I think being visible. People trust you more if they know that you have your ear to the ground and you are visible. So you're in classrooms, you're at events, you're at concerts, you're at games, you are visible. Those conversations, that builds trust when people know you are committed and you're in the work. And I also think you build trust by walking the walk on a daily basis. That's responding to emails, right? Treating people as humans, right? And the human side of the work, right? Taking time to build relationships with people. Those are all things that I think build trust. I think another thing that's been really important for me in my career as a way I build trust is by showing people that I really value and appreciate the good work that they're doing. Something I did once that's become a consistent part of my practice is I used to go into classrooms, type all my observation notes on my laptop, and then sort of walk out and share those, right? I still do that when I'm doing a formal observation. I went into a classroom one time to do a sort of a quick observation, and I forgot my laptop. So I just found a note card, found a piece of paper, and I jotted down sort of just some of the highlights that I saw in the classroom, all like positively framed appreciations. This teacher came out after a high school teacher in tears and said, no one has recognized or appreciated the work that I've ever done as a teacher. No one has ever written me a handwritten note. No one's ever said thank you. So I think those genuine signs and signals of, I care about you, I see the work that you're doing great work, keep it up, right? Those things go a long way. So I think your question, which combines like post-COVID world and combines sort of trying to build trust, I think it's getting the community around, we need to come up with a vision for post-pandemic education because we shouldn't just revert back to what happened before. How do we innovate? And getting people to trust the leader of this work by walking the walk, by listening, by being visible, and showing people sort of the appreciation and respect that you have for the hard work that they're doing.
Tom, if you were to, sorry, it's me. if you were to have an audience with, this is a follow-up to Carla's question, if you were to have an audience with local colleges and universities, what would you tell them their future teachers' curriculum would have to look like so that they'd be prepared for a post-COVID type educational system?
That is a great question, Mr. Robinson. For those of you who don't, I am a adjunct professor at Salem State, Gordon, and Endicott College, so I teach leadership courses for aspiring principals at Salem State and at Endicott, and I teach current and aspiring teachers at both Gordon and Endicott. So this is relevant, like in terms of just my relationships with some of the local universities. I would say this: I would step out of the way, and I would have them sit down with teachers. Right? The teachers know best at this time of what they need to step into a classroom. I'll tell you an example. We used to run a vacation academy when I was principal of the Bates, and we would bring in the best talent, they would say, at Endicott College, the best aspiring teachers to work alongside our top performing teachers to work with our students. And we found, they said, teachers, like, you all plan what these student teachers need to be ready to make that jump when they graduate in a year. And they had thought the thing that they had needed was they never knew how to collaborate on a common planning time team. So they said, every time they come, we're just going to sit them around a table like this, and we're going to collaboratively plan. And that's the best thing that we could do for their development. So I imagine that if you put the student teachers in the programs in the room with teachers, they're going to give a far better insight on what education sort of they need to prepare than sort of what I should from my seat.
Great. Thank you. John?
You brought up technology.
Yeah.
How would you see leveraging technology to advance Reading schools at this point?
That's another great question. Thank you, Mr. Parks. This is one before I put a stake in the ground around what technology was going to look like. I think there's a few things that I would need to learn more about. I'll give you my philosophy on it, but I think first I'd have to learn sort of what's the current state of infrastructure with technology. Reading a few documents saying that before there was, sort of a need to purchase more devices and things to get sort of everything up to speed or to use technology fully in all classes. What I need to do sort of a better analysis on where sort of the state of affairs as it relates to technology. I would also want to hear from, teachers to be able to hear, as you've navigated hybrid instruction, remote instruction, what are the opportunities that you see moving forward to be able to use technology more effectively? Right? I think that one of the dangers, like right now, especially in, is like technology becoming such a big thing, is just to say, let's just get everyone this. Let's just get them this program. Let's just put this in their hands and then expect people to be able to use it effectively. But I think being able to take a step back to say, all right, what's our current state of affairs with the resources that we have? What are the trade-offs if we invest heavily in technology? What are the trade-offs of other areas that we may have to sort of cut back and reduce? And also, if we're going to really invest heavily in technology, what are the ways that we would sort of use technology through the eyes and the lens of what teachers are saying is working and not working? Now, in terms of like me trying to answer that question specifically, and my own belief on technology, is I feel that technology has just broken down the barriers of just where we can do things. I just think it opens up the doors of like places and things of students that students can have access to. So my broad sort of response to that would be, I would love to use technology to be able to connect students to opportunities that they couldn't because of geographics. So either job opportunities, internship opportunities, connections with other schools, partnerships, organizations that are doing work that we couldn't because of geography. And also be able to break barriers to say that students couldn't learn this way in the classroom because, and therefore using technology to sort of close that gap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So describe your budget experience in both good financial times and difficult financial times. Also, what is your vision of how an ideal budget process works? Additionally, full-day kindergarten is a fee-based program in Reading with 90% plus participation. Explain how you would convert this to a tuition-free program for all, with the understanding that you will need to compensate for a $1 million plus budget shortfall.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. I feel really fortunate that my budget experience started as a principal, and I was alongside a superintendent who believed that I need to bring the principals along as part of the budget process. So I was a part of what I thought was an exemplary budget process as a principal, and also that sort of carried with me to my role now. So in terms of in good and bad, difficult financial times, I think I'd like to use the example of what I learned about Reading as sort of my foundation for this response. So first thing is that I feel fortunate that all of the meetings for the Reading Public Schools school committee have been streamed, and I've been able to watch sort of the budget process unfold. And I've learned a lot sort of just seeing how Reading approaches the budget. I think that has been an exemplar for other districts in how to approach sort of the budgeting process for several reasons, right? First, on the surface, the budget book is extremely comprehensive, detailed, organized. I think that sets the tone for just the level of professionalism around sort of how the budget process will be rolled out. And I think three major pieces. First, the connection to the strategic plan, right? I think Dr. Doherty was very clear as he rolled out the budget of how different additions to the budget would relate to a district strategic plan. For example, as you were talking about adding in a new literacy assessment, that aligns to sort of this pillar number 2 in the strategic plan, which is coherent instructional systems, right? Same thing, adding a literacy coach, which is something else, I think aligns to pillar number 2, right, around coherent instructional systems, right? So I think it's critically important in a budget process that things are grounded in strategic plans. If not, like I think we just end up doing what we call like initiative-itis. Like you're just pulling on all these good ideas that, in isolation may work, but if there's nothing to ground them together, it's going to be difficult to create sort of any coherence and alignment in the district work that you're doing. So first, step 1 is the connection to strategic plan. Step 2 is I think that the budget process needs to be extremely collaborative. I have heard, speaking to Mr. Lalash, who was saying he thought the Reading process, the budget process in town is the most collaborative in the state. And hearing Ms. Dowd speak about the budget, she was constantly saying phrases like, after I met with this group of principals, after I met with this department, thank you to this person for meeting with me, right? So the budget was not a reflection of what her and the rest of the central office team felt, was important. It was a reflection of what people in schools and in departments said that they needed to be able to deliver on what's in the strategic plan. So I think an ideal budget process has those opportunities for collaboration and listening to people who are most affected by budget decisions. And then the last piece about, I think, an effective budget process is the opportunity for feedback. I was really impressed with just the questions that were submitted by the community in relation to the budget, and then how those were bucketed into certain themes, and then how the central office team and the school committee took some of that feedback and then iterated on that, and I think presented what was a stronger budget. So I think as you share sort of what's an ideal budget process, I think the one, again, this is something from an outsider, the one that I saw take place in the Reading Public Schools was pretty close to what I would say is an exemplar. And I think that that's something that's really intriguing to me, is to say to come in where I know that this is a budgeting process is created as a collaborative process with the town and the school district. There is a solid foundation where it is organized through the strategic plan, again, through collaboration, through feedback, and also through just a process that reflects what they feel are the values of the community. I feel like if I were to look at just the Reading budget and not even know anything else about the district, I could connect some of the things that are important to the district. I could assume or infer what are some of the strategic priorities of the district, just because of the way that the budget really reflects the values. Now, I'd like to get to the part about the kindergarten, and I think this is a really difficult trade-off question. And I think this gets us back to a situation in Medford this year. We had an unanticipated $3 million shortfall as we started approaching planning out FY21. And we had to think about sort of what are the trade-offs of sort of where we make cuts, where we make adjustments, and what's that impact going to be ultimately on students and staff. We ultimately landed on our mantra of that we're going to make cuts furthest away from the classroom. So we're going to try to limit the impact of these cuts on students. And I think we were able to backfill some of the challenges that we face with some of the the one-off money that we received from CARES Act, ESSER, different things. But nonetheless, we were forced to make difficult budget decisions, and we're able to keep them as furthest away from the classroom as possible. Now, the situation with the kindergarten, I think, is really important because I think that early literacy matters tremendously, right, in sort of improving academic outcomes. there's a lot of research to say if you want to improve district outcomes, we have to stop spending so much on interventions and focus so much on high quality, early childhood, right? So I think that early childhood education really matters, and I bet everyone in this room agrees with that. And I think it's also an equity issue if we have that some students are not, able to access free full-day K. Now, it's a challenge and it's a trade-off because I think of what you said, it's a $1 million budget. I think I saw it was even 1.3 the last time.
Probably
I looked.
more than that. Yeah.
More than that, yeah. So that's like a number that's a really challenging number to sort of overcome, especially in a community that's already spending, like last FY19, FY20, 30% over net school spending. It's a community that's already pouring a lot into the schools. So I would say my push would be to think about other opportunities to increase revenue. I don't think there's probably many opportunities to decrease, to slim down or be more efficient. I think about we're losing students at times to other, vocational schools or other, different, private schools. Are there any programs as we think about 21st century learning that we can offer sort of an in-house program that may attract people to want to come, sort of choice in, or either keep some of the students who we are losing to be able to keep sort of in district as a way to decrease some of our, costs as well. Now, I don't know enough about, Reading's opportunities for school choice. I don't know what sort of alternative pathways have been explored, but I think that I've seen a lot of other districts who have been able to create opportunities for other programming by increasing revenue through offering some, unique and kind of niche programs that may have some students who would be really interested in. And I would just like to, again, emphasize, I really believe in early childhood education as everyone in this room does, and I also understand just the trade-off sort of that decision would entail.
Thank you. John Parks.
Nice one-liner for you, Tom.
Perfect, thanks.
Please discuss your process for goal setting, implementation, and monitoring.
Yeah, thank you. So one sentence question, I'm not sure if it's a one sentence answer, but I am also looking at the time. I see that it's 8:27 and we have a few questions, so I may move a little quicker through these next 4 questions, but if you want to prod and push a little more on follow-ups, certainly feel free. I look at this the same way as I look about like how do we set goals with teachers, like how do principals set goals with teachers, right? How do superintendents set goals with principals? It's sort of like how do we approach also setting like district-wide goal setting implementation, right? So I think that process starts with, especially the district level, getting the people around the table who are going to be impacted by sort of these goals, right? If we're talking about setting goals with teachers, the ones who are impacted is the teacher, right, and the students. So it's the teacher and the principal having these conversations. If we're talking district level goals, this should be students, families, right, teachers, central office administrators, principals around the table sort of setting goals. So I think the first part about setting goals is getting the right people around the table. I think then the next part is after you get the right people around the table is starting like backwards mapping, saying, okay, what are we trying to get to, right? I think if we start diving into the how we're going to get there, even before we define sort of what are the outcomes that we're trying to get to, we're getting ourselves in trouble. So I think starting, say, if we got the right people around the table, now let's create some clear benchmarks of what we're trying to do. Where are we trying to get to? And then let's backwards fill, right? Let's map in what are some of the ways that we think that we're going to get there? What are some of the programs, initiatives that we think will move the needle for there? And also, what are some of the metrics that we'll be using along the way to know whether we're making progress and we're on the right track, or that we need to make a correction and move in a different way. So I think if I had to summarize quickly my approach to goal setting, implementation, and monitoring, it's get the right people around the table, create clear targets and that you're shooting for, create clear metrics that you're going to use to measure success, and then collaboratively design the sort of the programs and initiatives that you use to get there, and collect feedback along the way to know if you're on the right track or you need to change course.
Thank you. Sean?
Thanks, Chuck. Please talk about your views on school safety and the various drills that have been established by state and national leaders. Do you think that there is sufficient evidence to support these drills across all levels?
Yeah. Great question. Thank you, Mr. Brandt. So I think I'd like to start by saying that school safety is like our number one priority. Right? We have to ensure that all students feel safe physically, first and foremost, but also social and emotionally in schools. And I think that's as I think about like how do you establish safety, I think that it's really important to, again, listen to people in the community, right? I have personal views on sort of like these topics, but these topics about making decisions about whether or not we're using drills, right? Especially drills like ALICE drills, response to active shooter drills, right? Should not be made by one leader. These should be made after we've listened to families, after we've listened to teachers, after we listen to principals, after we've listened to other stakeholders, and also vetted it with research. Now, I have to admit, I am not well-versed enough in the literature and the research right now to put a stake in the ground in sort of one way or the other, right? But I would commit to sort of doing a thorough vetting of the research, making sure the community has access to to those resources, and using those resources and the research to ground our conversation. Now, just because the research says one thing doesn't necessarily mean that's what's best for Reading, right? But using that research to ground our conversation, I think, is important. Now, I also I see school safety. A lot of questions I know I've heard about related to school resource officers as well. I would just like to share, too, my experience working in schools. I have worked with some of the most amazing educators, I call it, who are school resource officers, but also educators, who have actually been, I think, incredible in building relationships with students, right? Going above and beyond to connect with students and being integral in a student's journey and helping them through school. And it, more often than not, de-escalated situations that could have been really challenging or daunting, right? Supporting in situations that really above sort of their purview of what they're supposed to do. So I think about school safety and knowing there's a lot of conversations around school resource officers. I know that in my experience, I've had very positive interactions with sort of the work of school resource officers. I've also heard wonderful things about the school resource officers in Reading in particular. And I also know that that's not the truth for every student or family, and I would love to listen to their ideas and perspectives as well. But I couldn't take that school safety question without also, addressing sort of my own personal belief and philosophy on school resource officers as well.
Thank you. Carla Nazaro.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Tom, could you tell us about any experiences you may have with school construction or renovations, please?
Thank you, Mrs. Zaro. And this will be a quicker answer. I think one of the best things a leader can do is be honest and upfront about what they know and what they don't know. I have had minimal experience relating to sort of school building capital improvement projects. As a principal, we had some small, I would say, renovations and things, nothing of the major scale of revamping a whole school. I would say this year I've become an expert in HVAC, like many of us. I can speak HVAC with my brother-in-law, who is a contractor, and I never could do that. So I think there's some of those pieces where now I can hang in those conversations. But to say that I am well versed in the school building world would not be accurate. But again, knowing that I've heard conversations around the work that might need to happen at Killam, knowing the work around some of the potential space concerns in the district, this is certainly something that I will commit myself to learning, growing my practice in this area, and surrounding myself with people who know this work really well. But again, I think it's really important that leaders can be honest, open, and transparent about certain strengths and, obviously areas where they're not, as strong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we started at 7:15. So that takes us to, I guess, 8:45, Dorothy, is when the official time is up? Is it? Okay. So the last question is the one that Dorothy Presser sent you earlier.
Yes.
And Tom Wise is going to read that question.
This one you've had a little bit of time to prepare for, but I'll read it for the community who has not seen it as well as possible. So this is a scenario question as opposed to a straightforward question, and the scenario is as follows. The parent of an 8th grader objects to the teaching techniques of their student's math teacher, who provides a problem of the week over the weekend every weekend, which is then has to be solved by Monday. However, if no student can solve the problem and explain the method to the class, the teacher refuses to give the answer or a method for finding it. Parents who have been trying to help their children solve the problems note that some kids spend hours of weekend time wrestling with the challenge, often failing. Request by parents to give the answers and method to the students does not receive a response. Things come to a head at the PTO meeting when a parent with a math background points out that some problems pose a challenge for college math majors. Failing to give answers builds esteem problems for students, especially girls who are stereotyped unfairly as not ready for math. The teacher, however, is adamant. The teacher responds that it's my classroom and I do what I want. The principal, who hired the teacher, explains that it's important for kids to recognize the role of unanswered questions in their lives. As parent escalates to a school committee member and demands that this practice stop, some of their kids are being turned off to math and feel humiliated by the teacher. The board member calls the superintendent and demands that something be done. Walk through the process that you would use to solve this situation.
Thank you, Mr. Wise. So I think when I read this scenario, I think the first thing I thought of is this is a common situation. It may look slightly different in different factors or contextual things at play, but it's a common situation. And I'm guessing everyone in this room can relate to it from some sort of role. And I'm guessing everyone sort of at home can as well. So I can relate to this as a parent. I can relate to this as a teacher. I can relate to this as a principal. And I can relate to this as a central office administrator. So this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through sort of my analysis of the situation and also walk you through how I would handle resolving this. I think there's three major themes at play here. The first theme is around roles and responsibilities, right? And whose role is it to sort of do what in this scenario? The second is around opportunities for coaching, sort of in conflict. And then the third is around decision-making in conflict and who should be making these decisions. So let me start with the roles and responsibility piece. So each person in this role, each stakeholder plays a unique role. I'd like to start with the parent. I think the parent is doing exactly what they should be doing, what we want parents to be doing, and that's advocating for their child, right? Advocating for what they think is best for their child. The teacher's responsibility in this is also to work collaboratively with the parent to resolve the complaint, but also it's to be transparent and open about what you're doing in the classroom and why. I also say that I believe that teachers should be empowered to make instructional decisions, which we'll get to in a little bit, but teachers should feel empowered to have decision making about what they feel is best instructionally for their students. Now, the principal role is obviously, I believe, to coach and sort of the teacher in their response and their work, and also to help navigate the conflict between the parent and the teacher. I think the role of the superintendent is to be able to coach the principal and work with the principal to be able to make sure that this issue gets resolved in a way that is, a positive way for all stakeholders engaged, and also communicate with the school committee on what's happening. And now lastly, which I think can be a really complex role, and this is the school committee. Right? Again, I shared all of the school committee members in Reading wear other hats and do other things. So it's not as cut and dry as, let the school side handle this, right? So I think that there is an obligation for the school committee member to be responsive to their constituents, be able to answer to their constituents, and also a responsibility for the school committee to enable and empower the school district to be able to solve the problem. Now that also takes trust, and I recognize that. That takes, the school committee knowing that the superintendent and the team will resolve this in an effective way. And I know trust can take time to build. So I think that's one, just quickly to highlight sort of the roles at play here. Second thing I think there's some major opportunities for coaching in this scenario as well, between the principal and the teacher, and between the superintendent and the principal. And I'll start with the principal and the teacher. I see coaching in two areas. First, coaching around just the language of how they're talking to the families here. I see the language, and Tom read and did good, some strong intonation in his voice when he said, it's my classroom and I do what I want. I don't think that that's sort of the language that's going to build a trusting relationship with families. So there's an opportunity for the principal to collaborate and work with the teacher to work on some of just how that situation may be approached in a more positive way. And the second piece, which is really interesting in this, is the instructional implications of this. This question also has major instructional implications, right? So how is the principal working with the teacher to say, is this a developmentally appropriate task? Is what we're expecting here students to do, is this the appropriate amount of productive struggle? Or is this a task that's going to push them over the edge too much to frustration? And those are instructional conversations and coaching conversations that should be happening between a principal and a teacher. Now in terms of the coaching between the superintendent and the superintendent should be helping to coach the principal sort of around how do you navigate conflicts like this? How are you hearing all different voices? What are some things that you can try? What are some things that maybe you hadn't thought about yet? And also, I think the other important thing about this is how do you be able to talk instructionally with your principal to make sure that you are on the same page about whether or not that this may be a developmentally appropriate task for 8th grade students. And as I share that this is sort of very much the world that I've been living in as that principal coaching a teacher. As a principal, these are conversations that I have with teachers on a daily basis. I think that people would find that in these conversations, teachers felt valued, heard, and so did parents. And this is the work I'm living now as a central office administrator, where I'm working with principals, right, and coaching principals to handle conversations like this, not only in tact and approach, but also in instruction, right? This is an instruction-related question. And the last thing, which I think is the quickest here, is around decision-making. Who makes this decision? It's my philosophy that to solve problems the best, they need to be solved with the people who are closest to the problem. And the people who are closest to the problem in this scenario are the teacher, right, and the parent. Now, we know that that problem may not be able to be solved at that level, right, but we should be empowering that relationship to be able to solve this problem, because if we don't, it's not only going to blur all of those lines and responsibilities of everyone else that I talked about, but it's also not going to create a culture where these problems can be solved moving forward. Otherwise, they're just going to float right to the top, sort of, and expect it to be solved that way. Now, so sort of what do I do? That's my analysis of the different dynamics at play. Now, what would I do? I think first it would be my commitment as a superintendent to building those structures of a chain of command. Not to try to create hierarchy, but to be able to make it clear that everyone knows when there's a problem, here's who you go to and here's who's going to solve the problem. If we don't create that chain of command, things immediately go all the way up. I think it's also important, right, to create those coaching relationships. Principals need to constantly be talking to teachers, not always about just how they're interacting with families. I think teachers generally do that really well. But it's about these instructional questions, about what are developmentally appropriate tasks, what's the amount of, the appropriate amount of productive struggle. Those should be conversations that they should be having. And those are conversations that the superintendent should be ensuring happen in all of our schools. So I think that's the proactive part, setting up that chain of command, setting up those relationships. There can be coaching sort of relationships. Now I'm sure we're also thinking, that doesn't always work. I think that sets the foundation to solve the vast majority of problems and to also create a clear process for solving problems. But we all know this scenario will still happen even if we do those things well. So sort of how would I respond? My first response would be to talk to the school committee member who has come to me to demand that something be done, to share out my approach, how I am going to go work with the principal, hear from the principal on what they've tried, hear what they haven't tried, hear what's working, what's not working, and try to help them and position them to solve the problem. Then meeting with the principal. Again, hearing from the principal on what they're trying. Hearing from the principal, again, on what other options they could try. And trying to position them so they can then go work with the teacher to be able to solve this problem. The more that a central office administrator or a school committee member tries to come in and in one fell swoop solve the problem and make a definitive answer, is going to be taking away, I think, credibility and autonomy from the people who need it most, and also blurring the process moving forward of solving problems. So I think that empowering the people closest to the problem to solve the problem is at the crux of this. And I think that this is things that not only takes the structures to build, but also takes the culture, right? And getting people on board and this is how we're going to solve problems collaboratively and with one another.
Thank you. So we may have time for one follow-up, and then I'd like to give Tom an opportunity to make any closing remarks that you'd like to make. So. Yes, Carl?
I love your quote of culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I know you said that it was meaningful to you. And I think you've kind of talked about that throughout. It seems like it's a common theme. Do you have anything to add to that comment?
Yeah. You stole one of my favorite, I know you're quoting me, but you stole one of my favorite lines in education, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Tonight we've talked a lot about different things related to strategy and approach. But also, this work isn't going to happen unless there's a culture to sustain it. Right? A culture amongst, with students, a culture with staff, a positive culture with the community, right? And I think the way that is built is by leaders being willing to walk the walk, leaders being willing to work hard, leaders being willing to collaborate, leaders being willing to listen, leaders being willing to roll up their sleeves, leaders being willing or confident in doing things that they expect others to be able to do as well. So I think I really pride myself on someone who has, in every leadership situation, not only gained positive results, and positive outcomes, but done it in a way that has brought people along with me. And I'm very confident that that's sort of the leadership that I would bring here, as we are going to do this work together. and we're going to do this work as sort of a united team, and that's going to build the culture that we all want and we think is really important for sustaining and building a really powerful school community.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Sean. I know.
Sure?
Yeah.
All right.
Is that all right with Tom, another minute?
I can be here as long as you want, so that's fine with me.
Okay. So you've talked a lot, and we've heard a lot about your experience coaching superintendents and principals and sort of building strong relationships in a lot of those settings. Often those folks are older and more experienced than you, right? At least in terms of years of experience. Have you ever had a situation where you encountered somebody who was resistant to sort of taking coaching from you, and how did you approach building that relationship differently than where you didn't face that resistance?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. And that's something I think a lot about. And I think that's even, I can close on this sort of, because I think this is a great question, is I've thought a lot about, I'm entering this work around people who have done this work far longer than I have, right? And that is not something that I take lightly, right? And I think ultimately that's something that I say I am going to approach with the utmost humility, right, for when I step into a leadership role. And I'll give you an example. I was a high school and middle school teacher, was a high school administrator in training, and then my first administrator job, congratulations, you were an elementary school principal. Right? I had a lot to learn about becoming an elementary school principal, but I learned that the best way that I could lead that school community was positioning the people who knew the work the best in a position to be successful, building strong teams, and being humble enough to listen to people so I make decisions that are grounded in the people who know best. So I think that when I share someone coming in who hasn't had as much experience, I would first say, I feel that the experience I've had have been instrumental in shaping and preparing me to be able to lead this work, right? As a principal, as a current central office administrator, and sort of the program that I'm in to design to prepare me to do this. So I feel confident in my training, in my prep, but I also think that's not at the sake of me entering in with humility and the desire to learn, the desire to collaborate. Because ultimately, a superintendent who opens in with humility, a superintendent whose goal is to position others to be successful, and a superintendent who wants to bring people together to collaborate, I would argue, despite however many years you've had in that role, that is what's going to position you to be successful. And I think on that too, like if by the community investing in a first-year superintendent, I am someone who's going to make mistakes. Right? I'll make mistakes as a fifth-year superintendent. Like that's just, I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to learn from them. But I am someone who is going to commit to doing the work, commit to empowering others, commit to doing the work the right way. And I've found that more often than not, even when I'm up against people who may be more seasoned than I am, that approach and that style has more often than not, I think, positioned me to lead an organization forward and also position those to be, feel good about the work. Now, of course, to your specific question about has anyone ever not wanted to take feedback because of sort of maybe they have much more experience than me. And first, I respect that, and I value that, right? And I think what I've learned in those scenarios, that sort of has dissipated over time. Like, I think people may see this young person trying to give me feedback, and they may not want, listen at first. But I think as people see that, I am going to support them. I'm going to celebrate them. I'm going to listen to them, and I'm going to put them in a position to be successful. And I'm not going to sit here and tell them how to do their job. Yes, I will have a high bar for them, but I am also going to support them in the process. I've found that that's people who will get behind me. So I think generally it would be hard to find people that I've worked with who haven't felt empowered and supported by the way that I've coached and worked with them, even as we've navigated difficult situations.
Great, thank you. Did you have any other remarks you'd like to make at closing? Or?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take you up on that if that's okay. I know I said I could have put it into that last question. I would just like to thank the community. This has been a quick process over the past month, but a wonderful process. And I think I shared before just my sincere and genuine belief in the district and the strengths of the district, and also my belief that Reading can and should become the model of post-pandemic education. I really believe that because of the core strengths of the district. And I'd just like to share, as we think about that, post-pandemic, it's not just about recovery, but it's about innovation. And I think that something that I would bring to the Reading Public Schools is someone who is committed for the long term of not only helping Reading get through sort of this pandemic, but also being the leader who can bring the community together in that next phase of the work. And someone who's committed for the long term of, innovating and bringing Reading to the next, to the next level. So I am excited that you've all given me this opportunity tonight, the process. I'm really humbled to have this opportunity with you all tonight, and I really appreciate, everyone in the community, your support, your questions, your thoughts. I wish you all the best. Reading is a wonderful community, and I wish you the best, whether it's me or someone else. I really wish the best for the district moving forward. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you
sir.
so much,
Great job.
Tom.
I was just going to say, I'll see Tom out, and then
Okay.
if you have any follow-up with me, I'll be back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you,
Normally I'd
Tom.
Thanks
walk
again,
around.
Tom.
Can give you a bird.
Drive careful.
Thank you, Mr.
Drive
Wise.
safely,
Take care.
Tom.
You too, nice to
Thank
see
you,
you.
Mr. Brand. Thank you, Mr. Wise.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson. Thank you, Ms. Gaffin. Thank you, Mr. Parks. Very nice to meet everyone. Best of
too.
luck.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you. That wasn't too bad, was I, coughing?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
I didn't hear it.
Okay.
So I spoke to Dorothy earlier today, and her recommendation is that when we kind of do our debrief all at the same time for everybody, as opposed to doing some tonight, some tomorrow night. So if that's all right with the committee, we can do the debriefing on all the interviews after the second interview tomorrow night. Or we can wait until Thursday, too. It's up to you guys.
Why don't we maybe see what time it is? Because it's
Okay.
based on the length of,
Thanks again.
Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Take care.
we timed for 75 minutes. and
So we went
just
90,
went
I think we went 95 minutes or 90?
I don't think we started right at 7:15. I think we started a little bit after that.
So
I see
90
Gail nodding.
probably.
Knowing her, she probably got the clock over there. But
But
so
that
I don't.
means
John,
we
I
need to-
I think you had a follow-up, and I
No worries.
apologize.
But I would say we need to then give 90 minutes to each
Oh, we have to,
candidate
yeah,
tomorrow
absol-
night. So
no
then that
question.
already automatically puts us, so.
Okay. So
Yeah.
you guys want to play that by ear, I guess?
Yeah, I think we'll see how tired people are at the end of the night, and then assess from there. I think it might be beneficial to at least get some initial thoughts out there tomorrow if we can, and if we're cogent enough to have that conversation. So at least we could process a little bit before going into Thursday, but we'll see what time allows.
And is there anything different we should do tomorrow night that anybody thinks that, no?
I thought this went very well, Chuck. Thank you.
The only thing, I mean, I don't think it's different, but just as a point of learning from the search committee process, right, was we had a set time. In that case, it was an hour. And the chair, was thinking, we kind of set a bar in the first one that said, okay, that was going to be a little over an hour, so that's what we want as our maximum. And then we kind of used that as a guideline of, all right, how much time do you have left? Let's make sure we move this along so we don't end up with one that goes 2 hours, right? And we really think about it from a time management perspective as well. So the bar is approximately 90 minutes at this point in time.
So
And we don't want
what
to
was
go.
going through my head the whole time through that, when I was watching the clock, is, and to your point about the search committee, their role was to bring finalists to us.
Yep.
Our role is to make our most important decision, and that's why I didn't want to really stop it just cold at any time, really.
I mean, I agree with that, and that's why I think it was, the first one's always but it does set the bar. We can't, I mean, part of the
Oh,
process.
yeah, they have to be the same.
Part of the
Yeah.
process, exactly, and the part of the process is seeing how each of the candidates handles the questions, how time efficient they are,
Yep.
and whatnot as well. Not just, can they
Yeah.
speak for a long time, which is certainly a part of the process too, but
Yeah, it has to be equity.
it's it's managing the room, it's managing the interview, it's a whole lot of those things as well.
I confess I stopped following the time. I wasn't paying attention. So until actually Tom pointed it out, I was like, oh, I wasn't paying attention to what time it is. So, it could be helpful to say, okay, now we're at 45 minutes, so
Yeah,
we're
I
halfway. Or
I was going to do that. I didn't want to feel like Jeopardy,
What Chuck, why don't I suggest, you know,
Yeah.
I don't think we want to do kind of a hard stop for anybody, and the
No.
time needs to be equitable, but plus or minus a minute or two is probably, you know, it doesn't matter. Maybe what we need to do is plant a flag at the beginning of each one and say, you know, the last question that begins before 8:25, it will be the last question, and then we'll leave you 2 minutes, you know, for your closing statement, just so that we sort of know where the cutoff is for those two.
Okay.
That's essentially what we ended up doing in
Yeah.
the search committee
Yeah.
related process too, was if we didn't get through all the questions, that happens sometimes, and that's, again, it's part of the process.
Well, and Tom was mindful of it, and he sped up his answers.
Yep.
But, so if we can tell the candidates tomorrow, you know, at
Yep.
8:25, we'll have asked our last question, you know, if they want to keep an eye on the clock and speed up as they get towards the end, they have the opportunity to do that.
That's a good idea.
So we were just talking about the time and just making sure I'm more diligent with that tomorrow night, with when kind of warn the candidates that, you know, we're coming up on, I guess we went 90 minutes tonight. We started a little past 7:30, or 7:15.
Yeah, I started at 7:15 and went till, yep.
We can check the video. We can figure it
Yeah,
out.
we definitely will. It's all on videotape.
We don't have
right
to
now,
guess.
right?
We don't have to guess.
So do you have any feedback for us, Dorothy? Or?
You know, I think it was, I mean, you could have perhaps given a nudge. It seemed like you were on track. It's Gail's watch. I think you were, you know, I was kind of watching question and time, right? And it seemed like you were on track when you were about halfway through the questions, halfway through the time. And then either the questions got longer or there were more follow-ups or, you know, something made it get a little bit extended after that, even though some of the end questions were a little bit shorter, right? And some of that was him saying, I'll shorten it because I know we're right on time.
Yeah, question 8, we did 2 follow-ups, so that might have, but I thought they were good follow-ups, so.
It's hard, right? You
Yeah.
have to find that balance, so you want to get all the information you want, right? But in a reasonable time, so.
Okay. So who's coming tomorrow night? You told me that
Tracy, you mean from MASC,
From-
Tracy Novick?
Tracy. No.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not you
No,
tomorrow
it's not.
night? Okay.
We're at that time of the year when we're sort of figuring out how to share meetings and get every place we need to be.
So,
And what happens tomorrow night, given that we have 2 back-to-back? Where will Steve be while we're still meeting with Matthew?
our conference room.
Yeah. So it's the question, so Steve may be walking
I was-
through
so does he
when
get
you're
to walk through?
interviewing
Okay.
Matt, right? So that, I can ask Tracy
Back
to
staircase.
have,
There's a back staircase?
oh, there's a back staircase?
Yeah.
Just,
Okay.
okay. Then just,
Might not be open.
Will
though.
Tracy be down?
well, as
or-
long, you know, I'll tell her. You know,
Okay.
she can, generally, if we have people back to back, when we know it's getting close to time to meet the second candidate, we'll sneak out.
Okay.
To go meet them and bring them to the green room that whatever that is. So as long as, you know, someone tells Tracy how to get them there, we'll be all set.
Gail's got the thumbs up over there, so I think we're covered.
If nobody has anything, yes, Carl?
Is it inappropriate to talk about our process on Thursday, or to
What
talk
do you mean by our process?
just what Thursday night looks like for us in terms of what is our process to talk about the candidates? Or do we have any guidance on that?
Yeah.
Or how that goes, or is it not appropriate to talk about?
No, it
Oh, I think you
it's
should
appropriate, yeah.
talk about it.
Do you want to,
So-
you sent me that.
Yeah,
mo-
so I had sent Chuck a process for voting, you know, so sort of opening up the deliberation, and sort of deciding, sometimes people say, well, let's talk about each candidate. And then as you get into that discussion, sometimes as people are talking about matching the candidate to the position and understanding that everything you say is public and may follow them, right? So you want to be aware of that. That sometimes in that discussion, it will become clear where the leaning is going. And at that point, someone, Chuck can call for a motion, and you guys can decide. Chuck, you have the information about, and you can talk at the beginning about, will it be, a vote, go around and a vote for each candidate, or someone making a motion for a particular candidate, and that goes up or down. So Chuck, maybe, do you want me to send that information, that pamphlet that I sent you to everybody, so they?
You mean the motion, the one page?
The information I sent you about the process.
Yeah, I guess it would be an open meeting violation if I did it.
No,
so-
it's informational.
Yeah,
you're just-
then I can send, I sent
Yeah.
it to Tom.
Yeah.
I can just send that to you.
You're just forwarding on something that I sent to you. There's
Okay.
no deliberation involved in it.
Yeah, I'll get that to the committee tonight or tomorrow morning.
And it kind of outlines the process of the discussion and the different paths you could follow to get to the
So
ultimate
there are
decision.
different ways to vote.
Yeah,
Yeah.
We'll decide, okay.
yeah.
I mean, the document does say it's the chair's decision, and it probably is, but knowing Chuck, he'll manage by consensus in most cases. And anyway, there's basically two ways to vote. There's a ballot-based, which is like everybody vote for one person, and that may lead to a consensus that then leads to a motion, or there's the motion-based, right? And with the motion-based, you motion for each one, and you vote yes or no for each one. I like the elegance, personally, of having read through this, of the ballot-based, but when you all have a chance to read through it, we can have that conversation briefly on Thursday and figure out what the right way to do it is. The elegance I see of the ballot base is you're not voting nay on somebody necessarily, you're voting yes for somebody until you have some sort of consensus that there is a chance that you're going to vote yes for that everybody's going to get to a point of yes for everybody, for somebody.
And I would say that that's the most common,
Yeah.
path that's followed. Helpful?
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll send that out, and then if you want to be prepared to talk about it at the beginning of the night on Thursday night.
Okay, great, thank you.
So. Anything else?
Motion to adjourn?
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor? Thank you.
And you didn't have to do it by roll call.
And thank you to Gail and Carrie and Andy
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
See
Thank
some of
you.
you
and
tomorrow night.
RCTV.
Dorothy, thank you for the organization.
Yeah, thank you, Dorothy.